Acast powers the world's best podcasts. Here's a show that we recommend.
Hey folks, looking for a whole new thing to be into?
Well, check this and check it out. We're the Sloppy Boys.
And we're basically like pretty much the new classic guys.
We were in a comedy group called the Birthday Boys with Bob Odenkirk, and now we're an indie band and we have a podcast about the drinks of the summer, like the Gator Bite or the Grape Gorilla.
And we have guests that are music people like Jeff Rosenstock or Stefan from the band Pup, or comedy people like Tom Sharpling or Mitch from Doughboys.
Yeah, dude.
We talk about TV and movies and music like Turnstile or King Giz, and it's completely kind of cool.
Ooh.
Give it a listen and check it out to see what you think. But don't forget that we're the new classic guys.
Acast helps creators launch, grow, and monetize their podcasts everywhere. Acast.com.
This is not a drill. You can get the new iPhone 16e with Apple Intelligence for just $49.99 when you switch to Boost Mobile.
Wait, that's the actual fire alarm. We need to go. Visit your nearest Boost Mobile store for full offer details. Apple Intelligence requires iOS 18.1 or later. Restrictions apply.
For Mervis Diamond Importers, this is Ronnie Mervis. In a sea of ordinary engagement rings, Takori stands out. Takori rings feature hidden, intricate details. Because your ring should be as extraordinary as your love. Not mass-produced, never generic, always personal. Crafted with passion in every meticulous detail. Takori. No boring rings. Why settle for the same ring as everybody else? And when you pair the unmatched beauty of a world-famous Mervis diamond with your Takori engagement ring, it says even more. Mervis means more diamonds, better quality, and the most value. With easy Mervis financing, you can get her dream diamond now. Don't wait. To shop our mouth-watering Mervis diamonds and the largest selection of Takori bridal jewelry in the tri-state area, visit us in-store or go online to mervisdiamond.com. or call for an appointment at 800-HER-LOVE. Again, that's mervisdiamond.com or 800-HER-LOVE. Mervis Diamond Importers, your official Takori jeweler.
A low wind sighed through the dark woods behind Fox Hollow Farm, carrying the distant sound of rustling leaves. Joe LeBlanc paused on the gravel driveway, his dog Fred at his side. The night was moonless, the Indiana countryside around the old estate pitch black, except for the narrow beam of Joe's flashlight. Somewhere in the thicket of trees ahead, a branch snapped. Fred's ears perked up, a growl rising in the dog's throat. Joe's pulse quickened. He had heard something moving in the woods. He aimed his flashlight at the tree line and froze. A figure stood just beyond the reach of the light. A man wearing a bright red t-shirt. In the darkness, Joe could not make out the man's face, but the stranger was watching him from between the trees. Joe opened his mouth to call out, but before he could utter a word, Fred bolted forward, yanking the leash from Joe's hand and tearing off into the woods after the red-shirted figure. Joe shouted for his dog and jogged after, crunching over dead leaves and twigs. The mysterious man turned and glided deeper among the shadowy trunks, seeming almost to float as he receded. In an instant, he vanished into the gloom. I'm Sarah Powell, and this is Obscurata, because some stories have no ending. Heart pounding, Joe plunged into the woods, desperate to catch up to Fred. The air was cold and eerily still under the canopy of towering trees. No moonlight reached the forest floor. Only the beam of Joe's flashlight danced over gnarled roots and patches of mist. "Fred," he called hoarsely, his own voice sounding small in the vast silence. A prickle of dread ran down his neck. He had lost sight of both dog and man. Suddenly, Fred barked sharply somewhere ahead. Joe stumbled toward the sound. Branches clawed at his arms. He could barely see, but he could feel an oppressive presence all around, as if the darkness itself had eyes. Without warning, the man in the red shirt appeared right in front of Joe. Joe gasped and staggered back. In the thin glow of the flashlight, the figure's upper body was visible. The red t-shirt stained with something dark. But from the waist down, there was only empty air. Before Joe could fully register this impossible sight, the figure's face twisted into a mask of anguish. Then, in the space of a single heartbeat, the apparition evaporated. The man in the red shirt was gone. Fred came bounding back through the brush to Joe's side, but Joe was already sprinting toward the house, his breath ragged and his mind reeling with fear. He and Fred burst out of the woods and into the clearing around the farm. Joe didn't stop running until he was safely inside, slamming and locking the door behind him. It would be much later that he'd admit to himself what he had seen, a ghost, and one whose tragic story was intertwined with the very ground on which he stood. Only a few years earlier, Fox Hollow Farm had been a dream come true. In 2009, Robert "Rob" Graves and his wife Vicky purchased this secluded 18-acre estate in Westfield, just outside Indianapolis. They'd been craving an escape from city life, a place with open space for their children to play, perhaps some woods to explore. When they first saw Fox Hollow Farm, it seemed perfect. A grand Tudor-style mansion with plenty of room, a swimming pool, and peaceful horse pastures bordered by dense forest. And surprisingly, it was affordable. The property was a steal, far below its expected price for such a beautiful home. As they toured the empty house, Rob wondered why a property so gorgeous had stood unsold. Then the unsettling answer dawned on him. He recalled news reports from the 1990s. Wasn't this the house where Herb Baumeister lived? He asked the realtor. Yes, it was indeed the former home of Indiana's most notorious serial killer, Herbert "Herb" Baumeister. That was why no one else wanted it. Rob and Vicky exchanged a glance. The tragedy that had unfolded here was horrific, but the couple decided they could accept the home's dark history in exchange for the fresh start it offered their family. With a mixture of excitement and apprehension, they signed the papers. Fox Hollow Farm was theirs. In the beginning, life at Fox Hollow Farm was idyllic. Their children laughed as they ran through the woods and swam in the indoor pool. Rob and Vicky busied themselves with the upkeep of the sprawling house. For a short time, it seemed the estate's bloody past might truly be behind them. But the shadows of Fox Hollow Farm were not content to rest quietly. Odd occurrences began to intrude on the Graves family's peaceful new life. The first incident came one morning as Vicky tidied up the pool room in the basement. The kids had tracked in some gravel, and Vicky, a scientist by profession, level-headed and pragmatic, was vacuuming the concrete around the pool's edge. Suddenly, the vacuum fell silent. Puzzled, Vicky looked and saw that the cord had come unplugged from the extension socket across the room. Perhaps she'd stretched it too far, she thought. She walked over and plugged it back in. But a minute later, the vacuum died again. This time, the plug wasn't just loose. It lay a foot away from the outlet, as if it had been yanked out by someone or something with force. Brow furrowed, Vicky pushed the plug firmly back into place and resumed cleaning. She tried to ignore the chill creeping up her spine. When the vacuum cable ripped itself out a third time, right before her eyes, Vicky's heart lurched in her chest. The plug flew clear of the socket, as if an invisible hand had snatched it. In the sudden silence, Vicky became acutely aware that she might not be alone. The hairs on her arms stood on end. She later confessed that in that moment, she sensed a presence, an unseen someone in the room who did not want her there. Swallowing her fear, Vicky spoke into the empty air, half in frustration and half in trembling respect. "Stop unplugging the vacuum, I need to finish." Whether by coincidence or compliance, the vacuum stayed on after that. Nonetheless, Vicky hurried to finish her task and left the pool room, unsettled by the encounter with what she could only describe as a phenomenon that defied rational explanation. Not long after, Vicky saw something that shook her to the core. It was a bright afternoon when she returned home from work to find Rob outside, painting a piece of furniture in the yard. As they chatted, movement at the edge of the woods caught Vicky's eye. She squinted toward the tree line. A young man in a red t-shirt was standing among the trees, watching the house. For a split second, Vicky assumed it was perhaps a trespasser or curiosity seeker drawn by the property's notorious history. But as the man turned away, Vicky's jaw dropped. From the waist down, the man had no legs at all. His body simply faded into thin air. An instant later, before Vicky could utter a word, the red-shirted figure vanished, blinking out of existence like a flickering bulb. Vicky's blood ran cold. She'd seen him clearly. The red shirt, the human figure with absolutely nothing below the torso. It wasn't a trick of the light, and it wasn't the first time. Vicky had quietly noticed this same red-shirted stranger on 2 earlier occasions, glimpsed from a distance on their property. Until now, she hadn't dared tell her husband. The sightings were too bizarre, too frightening. But seeing the phantom up close, in broad daylight, forced her to speak up. She turned to Rob, voice shaking, and related what she'd just witnessed. Rob was sceptical, suspecting perhaps it was some morbid serial killer groupie sneaking around the woods, or maybe Vicky's eyes playing tricks. The couple walked the perimeter of the yard together, searching for any sign of an intruder. There was no trace of anyone. Rob could tell how disturbed his wife was. Vicky insisted the figure had literally disappeared before her eyes. Though it sounded impossible, he knew Vicky was not someone prone to wild imagination. In the days that followed, Rob made some inquiries. He reached out to a local paranormal investigation group that, he learned, had actually visited Fox Hollow Farm a year before the Graves family bought it. When Rob described his wife's encounter, one investigator didn't seem surprised. In fact, the investigator calmly told Rob, "Let me tell you what she saw and where she saw it." To Rob's astonishment, this complete stranger proceeded to repeat Vicky's experience word for word. the man in the red shirt seen in the same patch of woods. The paranormal team informed the Graves family that their new home already had a chilling reputation. They revealed that Fox Hollow Farm was believed to be the most haunted house in Indiana. Rob was stunned. He had expected some lingering eerie feelings, given the property's past, but nothing like this. Vicky wasn't the only one seeing ghostly apparitions. Others had reported the red-shirted man as well. And as the investigators warned, there were other spirits there too. Rob and Vicky tried to process this revelation. They had entered into the purchase of Fox Hollow Farm with eyes wide open about its history. But the couple had not been particularly superstitious people. Now they faced the possibility that the victims of old crimes, or perhaps the killer himself, might still linger in some form on the grounds. The family was uneasy, but they were determined not to be driven away. After all, this was their dream home, haunted or not. Rob even installed security cameras around the property, hoping to catch any intruders or unexplained activity on film. Quietly, he also resolved to learn everything he could about what had happened at Fox Hollow Farm. The key to the haunting, he suspected, lay in the property's former owner and the atrocities he had committed. The ghost in the red shirt was a warning, a harbinger of the darkness rooted in Fox Hollow's soil. To understand the restless spirits now stirring to life, you must first understand Herb Baumeister, the man who had turned this idyllic farm into a burial ground. Years before anyone reported ghostly figures roaming the woods, Fox Hollow Farm had been the private kingdom of Herbert Richard Herb Baumeister. Outwardly, Herb Baumeister was the picture of a successful, everyday family man. He was a local business owner, husband to his wife Juliana, Julie, and father of 3 children. In the 1980s, Herb and Julie opened a chain of thrift stores in Indianapolis, naming their venture Save-A-Lot. By 1991, despite financial strains and marital tensions, the Baumeisters managed to purchase the 18-acre estate known as Fox Hollow Farm, a $1 million property in the affluent Indianapolis suburb of Westfield. To friends and neighbours, Herb appeared to be living the American dream, a self-made businessman with a sprawling home, a family, and even a flair for the eccentric. He once drove a hearse for fun and had a penchant for odd jokes. But beneath the veneer of normalcy, Herb Baumeister led a ghastly double life. By the early 1990s, young men in Indianapolis were vanishing without a trace. Many of them were last seen at gay bars in the city's vibrant downtown scene. Unbeknownst to Herb's wife and children, he had been frequenting these bars at night, introducing himself to potential victims under a false name, Brian Smart. Investigators later concluded that Herb was likely the most prolific serial killer in Indiana's history. He's believed to have murdered as many as 20 to 25 young men during the 1980s and early 90s, targeting primarily gay men whom he lured back to Fox Hollow Farm on the promise of private liaisons or parties. Once isolated at the farm, Baumeister preyed on these men in the very areas where the Graves family now lived: the pool room, the woods, and other secluded corners of the property. Baumeister's method was as depraved as it was chilling. He often courted his victims with alcohol and flattery, then suggested a dangerous game. One survivor, known by the pseudonym Tony Harris, recounted a night in 1994 when Brian Smart invited him to a mansion with an indoor pool, Fox Hollow Farm, and proposed they engage in erotic asphyxiation. Harris went along until Baumeister's demeanour turned deadly. In the warm, humid air of that pool room, Baumeister slipped a hose around Harris's neck and began to strangle him during the act. Harris realised in a flash that this was not a consensual game at all. It was a murder attempt. He fought back ferociously and managed to break free. Tony Harris escaped with his life, but his friend Roger Goodlett, whom Baumeister had also approached at a bar, was not so fortunate. Roger disappeared, one of many, who would never be seen alive again. Harris later went to the police with his story, giving authorities their first solid lead on the man responsible for the string of disappearances. Meanwhile, Herb Baumeister continued to live his outwardly unremarkable life. His wife Julie noticed their marriage deteriorating and Herb's behaviour growing stranger, but she didn't know that human bones were accumulating just beyond their back door. In the summer of 1994, the Baumeister's teenage son was playing in the wooded backyard when he stumbled upon a shocking find: a human skull lying on the ground, staring blankly skyward. The boy carried the skull into the house to show his mother. Julie was alarmed, but Herb calmly explained that it was an old anatomical specimen, a relic from his late father's career as an anesthesiologist. He claimed he'd found the skull in the garage and buried it as a prank, or simply to dispose of it, and some animal must have unearthed it. Remarkably, this explanation satisfied Julie for the time being, but she could not shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. Over the next year or two, Herb's erratic behaviour, financial troubles, and the dark rumours swirling around Fox Hollow Farm drove Julie to the breaking point. By 1996, she'd filed for divorce and resolved to go to the authorities with her suspicions. She remembered the skull and realised Herb's story made little sense. Summoning her courage, Julie contacted the police and gave them permission to search Fox Hollow Farm, a step Herb had vehemently refused when police had previously asked to investigate. Herb sensed the noose tightening. In June 1996, while Herb was away on a trip, and unbeknownst to him, his wife was cooperating with law enforcement. Investigators finally arrived at Fox Hollow Farm with shovels, evidence bags, and a growing sense of horror. What they uncovered would shock the nation. Scattered across the wooded grounds behind the house lay thousands of human bones and bone fragments, in shallow graves, in leaf-strewn thickets, even in the remnants of burn piles. Police and forensic teams found charred and pulverised remains, the grisly calling cards of a serial killer trying to destroy evidence. Over the course of 2 weeks, investigators unearthed an estimated 5,000 to 10,000 bone fragments belonging to at least 11 different people. Many bones bore marks of fire. Herb had attempted to burn some of the bodies and crush the bones, scattering them like so much refuse in the woods. In one area, searchers discovered a pile of skeletal remains, including a skull and vertebrae, likely the same spot where Herb's son had originally found the skull 2 years prior. The farm that had once promised the Baumeister family a peaceful life had become a clandestine cemetery. Among the debris, investigators also recovered personal items that hinted at the violent final moments of the victims. Handcuffs, spent shotgun shells, and a garden hose that might have been used as a strangulation tool. The air around Fox Hollow Farm hung heavy with the stench of death and burnt flesh as forensic teams worked to identify the remains. Before police could arrest Herb, he fled across the Canadian border. In July 1996, park rangers in Ontario discovered Baumeister's body inside his car at Pinery Provincial Park near Lake Huron. He'd committed suicide with a .357 Magnum, a single gunshot to the head. On the passenger seat lay a crumpled, rambling 3-page suicide note. In it, Herb expressed regret over his failing marriage and business troubles, and even apologised for littering the park with his corpse. But tellingly, he never admitted to the murders or mentioned the victims' remains found at Fox Hollow Farm. In death as in life, Herb kept his dark secrets close. He died at age 49, taking with him any answers to the question of why he had done such unspeakable things. Back in Indiana, authorities were left to piece together the enormity of his crimes without the perpetrator in custody. Ultimately, Baumeister was linked to the disappearance and murder of at least 16 men in Indiana and Ohio, and he remains a prime suspect in the Interstate 70 strangler killings. A series of murders where bodies of young men were found dumped along Interstate 70 during the 1980s. Investigators believe Herb started killing long before he bought Fox Hollow Farm and simply moved his heinous activities to his new private estate once he had it. If true, his total victim count could be as high as 24 or more. By 1999, police had definitively linked Baumeister to at least 9 victims whose remains were found at Fox Hollow, 8 of whom were identified by name at that time. But many of the bones on the property remained unidentified. Herb's evil cast a long shadow. For decades after his death, forensic scientists and the local coroner's office continued efforts to identify the countless bone fragments from Fox Hollow Farm. Amazingly, even nearly 30 years later, progress is still being made. Using modern DNA technology and genetic genealogy, authorities as recently as 2023 and 2024 have managed to put names to some of unidentified remains. The Hamilton County coroner has appealed to families of missing persons from that era to come forward and provide DNA samples, hoping to finally give names and closure to all of Baumeister's lost victims. To this day, it's estimated that up to 25 victims may have been killed and buried at Fox Hollow Farm, or by Herb's hand elsewhere. Several sets of remains found on the property are still unknown, their identities silenced by the grave. The ground at Fox Hollow was poisoned by Baumeister's brutality, and some believe that the very souls of his victims were left trapped there, unable to move on. When Rob and Vicky Graves moved into Fox Hollow Farm, they understood, in a general sense, what had happened on that property. A number of men had been murdered by the previous owner, their bones scattered and only partially recovered. But living in the house where a serial killer had prowled was an abstract concept, until strange incidents, like the unplugging vacuum and the apparition in the woods, made it disturbingly concrete. After those early encounters, the Graves family remained on edge. They now knew that something inexplicable was happening in their home. For all of Rob's attempts to rationalise the events, he was naturally sceptical. He couldn't deny that. Stuff happens here I can't explain. Lamps would mysteriously be found moved to different spots overnight. Unidentified noises echoed through empty rooms. At times, Vicky swore she saw fleeting shapes outside the windows, dismembered figures that appeared for a heartbeat and then were gone. Parts of the house gave them the creeps for no discernible reason. Vicky flat out refused to use one particular bathroom off the master bedroom because every time she stepped inside, the fine hairs on the back of her neck would prickle in alarm. Psychics later told the Graves that the bathroom was a portal, a kind of doorway for spirits moving between realms. If true, it seemed the house had become a crossroads between the living and the dead. Despite the escalating weirdness, the Graves family was determined to stay. "We love it here," Rob insisted, even as he acknowledged the paranormal activity. "We want to change the dynamics of what was." For Rob, giving in, abandoning the house, felt like letting Herb win, allowing the darkness of the past to triumph over their hopes for the future. So they stayed, and they sought ways to cope. Rob invited a trusted co-worker and friend, Joe LeBlanc, to move onto the property. Joe was a young man who worked with Rob at the car dealership and needed a place closer to work. As it happened, Fox Hollow Farm had an in-law apartment above the garage that stood empty. In late 2010, Rob offered it to Joe at a good rate. Out of respect, Rob made sure Joe knew exactly what kind of history the farm carried, whose house it had been, and what had been found in the woods out back. To Rob's surprise, Joe barely batted an eye. In fact, Joe seemed oddly intrigued by living at such an infamous address. He was at the time fairly sceptical of the paranormal and more concerned with practical matters, like whether the apartment had been renovated since the murders. It had. Rob assured him that the apartment had been gutted and remodelled completely after 1996. All traces of the past were gone from that space. Joe shrugged off the dark legacy, packed up his belongings and his beloved dog Fred, and moved in to Fox Hollow Farm.
For Mervis Diamond Importers, this is Ronnie Mervis. In a sea of ordinary engagement rings, Takori stands out. Takori rings feature hidden, intricate details, because your ring should be as extraordinary as your love. Not mass-produced, never generic, always personal. Crafted with passion in every meticulous detail. Takori, no boring rings. Why settle for the same ring as everybody else? And when you pair the unmatched beauty of a world-famous Mervis diamond with your Takori engagement ring, it says even more. Mervis means more diamonds, better quality, and the most value. With easy Mervis financing, you can get her dream diamond now. Don't wait. To shop our mouth-watering Mervis diamonds and the largest selection of Takori bridal jewelry in the tri-state area, visit us in-store or go online to mervisdiamond.com or call for an appointment at 800-HER-LOVE. Again, that's mervisdiamond.com or 800-HER-LOVE. Mervis Diamond Importers, your official Takori jeweler.
And that's the end of this first part of a two-part story. I hope you enjoyed it. I'll be back again on Thursday with the second part. If you'd like to support this podcast, you can do so by visiting patreon.com/The Whispering Woods, where for £2.50 you can listen completely ad-free. You can also now subscribe on Apple, where for $4.99 you can listen to this podcast and our other podcast, The Whispering Woods, absolutely ad-free. I want to say a quick thank you to Rog, all fact-checking and editing. And as always, stay curious and sleep with the lights on, just in case.